Okay, so we are going to go over surface anatomy first, and then I'll describe a little bit of some of the work you're going to do on the brain before we bisect and look at the internal structures. Okay, so I'm holding the brain. It's actually opposite. Let's see. So to you, that looks anterior. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to hold it the anterior view for you. So first of all, we're going to go with where the different lobes are of the brain. So this is the anterior view. Also, see this nice big line right here? This, and it goes quite deep, that's your longitudinal fissure. Okay, so anteriorly, the front portion, the anterior portion on either side is your frontal lobe. Okay, on behind the frontal lobe, kind of on the top sides, I know it sounds kind of silly, are your parietal lobes. So let me turn this guys. Some of these are mushy, just do your best, okay? So frontal lobe, parietal lobe is going to be above. Below the parietal lobe is where you're going to have your temporal lobe. Kind of imagine this is where the ear would be, okay? And then the back portion, the posterior portion, is going to be your occipital lobes. And so if you had a whole brain on the quiz, you would need to know right versus left. If it's just a half brain, I am not going to ask you to say right versus left because that's really kind of unfair. Okay? So only right versus left if there's a whole brain on the quiz asking you to identify something. Okay? Otherwise you don't need to worry about it. Okay, so those are the major lobes. Behind the occipital lobe, we have this little structure that kind of sits below, like here. See that? That's our cerebellum. Okay? Let's see. Now, we talked briefly about this before, the folding of the cerebral cortex. So, where you have the bumps, what do we call a bump? The gyrus. And when it folds in? Sulcus. Good. And then the really deep ones are called fissures. Excellent. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to turn the brain over. We're going to look at the inferior view to identify some structures real quick. So here is the frontal lobe. So this is anterior to, the image is switched for me. Sorry. Okay. So this is the anterior portion, so frontal lobe. Sitting at the base of the inferior portion of the frontal lobe are what we would call these little, they're white tracts. This is the olfactory bulb. It's the enlarged portion here. So this is the olfactory bulb, and then you see, you can follow that white tract of matter. This is the olfactory tract. So the nerve that's carrying all the information from the olfactory bulb, from your nasal cavity, and then the olfactory tract goes back to I believe it's to the temporal lobe. Okay, so those are two structures you do need to know. Is if the pin is here, it's your olfactory bulb. If it's along here, it's the olfactory tract. That is cranial nerve number what? 1. Okay, cranial nerve number 2 is our what? Optic. Excellent. So, unfortunately, most of these brains, they cut the optic nerves really short. So what most of you are going to see is a little X right here, and then I'm going to move that blood vessel out of the way, and then these white myelinated tracts going back to either side. They go back to the occipital lobe. So normally you'd have the optic nerve traveling up here to one eye and the optic nerve traveling up here to the other. This X is called the optic chiasm. That's where some of the nerve tracts switch and move to the opposite side of the brain. Okay, so some from the right move to the left side or perceived in the left side of the brain and vice versa. We'll get into more detail in class about that, but just knowing the X is the optic chiasm, then the portions is just the regular optic nerve tract. That's the tract. Okay. let's see here. Other structures. We're going to need to do a little bit of cleaning, so I'm going to show you a little bit right now. I just stuck the probe underneath some blood vessels and just gently pulled, and they'll come off really easy. So I'm using blunt probe first. Okay, the brain is really delicate, and some of these, for some reason, are very mushy. So we want to be careful. So if you can get a blood vessel up, that means you're underneath the pia mater. Okay, so we want to be able to kind of see, at least, you want to clean the inferior portion to see some structures better. So right here, I'm getting my probe up underneath the pia mater, so you can see that's a membrane. And what you can do is, once you do kind of get a nice little bit of pia mater, you can use your tweezers to gently pull it off, but you got to be careful with tweezers, because if you get a little too aggressive, you're going to start tweezing parts of the brain off. And it happens. I mean, it's a different type of tissue than most of you have worked with before. So the goal is to kind of clean the inferior portion so we can see some of that, some of the anatomy better. So really quick, I cleaned around the optic chiasm a little bit. So a couple structures that are easier to see now. See this bump here? That's a little bit damaged, but this bump is your mammillary body. And this little hole here is where the infundibulum would have attached. So this brain does not have one. I have one up here that does have the pituitary gland. I'm going to try to dissect it while you're working so that you can see it, but it's kind of hard to do. So mammillary body, this little hole is where the infundibulum would attach from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. And then very quickly, a few brainstem structures, and then you're going to clean for a bit. So on either side of the mammillary body, see these two bumps? Okay, those two bumps, they're called the cerebral peduncles. Okay? Peduncle. It's kind of a fun one. Okay? Below the cerebral peduncle, you have this bump. Okay? Split down the middle, bump, bump. Anybody know what that one is? You can look in your book. It's okay. The pons. Okay? And then I'm kind of clearing off a little bit more here. This is the bottom portion of the brainstem. Anybody know what the bottom portion is called? Yeah, the medulla oblongata. So here, let's see, medulla oblongata, you have the pons, these are your peduncles, okay? You'll clean up around it so you can see the definition really well. A couple other things I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to let you clean. To get the longitudinal fissure, sorry, backwards again. To really see the longitudinal fissure well, there's two things you can do. Blunt probe, kind of gently, just kind of pull apart the connective tissue. You got to be, again, very gentle. The tissue is soft and it's easy to break through. If the blunt probe isn't working too well and you're nervous, you can take your tweezers, close your tweezers, put them into that little gap and gently open it. Put it in, gently open it, and that will gently kind of break the connective tissue, hopefully without causing too much damage, so that you can actually clearly define your longitudinal fissure. Okay, so this is a way, ideally, to do it without causing too much damage. So you're going to want to do that, and you're going to want to do it all the way to the back. Now this one's nice because some of the connective tissue has already been cleaned off. The pia mater. At the base, all right, I'm going to turn this guy around. Sorry. But at the base, so here's our occipital lobes again. You will have some connective tissue here. You're going to need to clean away, nice and gentle. And you're going to do that in order to view some structures. So I'm going to show you, this one's nice and clean. I'm going to hold the brain kind of between my fingers here and very gently kind of pull down on the brainstem and the cerebellum. Okay, very gently, because some of these are fragile. And so external structures that we can look at. We have these two big bumps. You see those? Those are your superior colliculi. These two guys. The little bumps below, they're much smaller. Your inferior colliculi. And then right above your superior colliculi, there's a little tiny gland. It's kind of hard to see under there. That little dude, that's your pineal gland. And it produces melatonin, and it's important in your sleep-wake cycle. So when you're cleaning, you're going to clean away the tissue so that you are able to visualize that pineal gland. Just remember, don't pull so hard on here that you break the tissue. Some of them are already slightly damaged, like this one. That's okay. Just do your best. So clean away some tissue, and I'd like for you to at least get a little portion of the cerebral cortex clean so you can clearly see a nice sulcus and gyrus, okay? So have a little bit of fun with your piometer, okay?